All right, folks. It's 7 o'clock and 32 seconds. I am half a minute late. I apologize. We have an exciting program to get to this evening, so let me get my okay. It's 7:01 on August 10th. I'll open this meeting of the North Texas Archaeological Society. Welcome, everybody. For those of you on Zoom, you may see that we have a new camera set up. You will no longer get a close-up of my face, so hopefully that means we'll get even more folks on Zoom moving forward. A few general announcements. I'd like to welcome some new members. We welcomed 14 new and returning members since our July meeting. We're starting to grow and grow and grow even more. We're up to around 280 members at present. The TAS annual meeting is October 6th through 8th in San Marcos. If you are planning to attend the meeting, please go ahead and book your room at the conference hotel before the beginning of September. The benefits of that are that you get to stay in one place, attend the meeting, have fun afterwards, see your friends, eat dinner, and you never have to leave. You can just stay there the whole time. It's wonderful. So please book your room. A reminder that NTAS scholarships are now available to anyone who applies. It goes to our scholarship committee. We make a decision about it. But non-NTAS members and NTAS members can apply for an NTAS scholarship to attend the annual meeting. So please see the website for those requirements. A reminder that our September 2023 guest speaker is Sherman Horn, who will be speaking about LIDAR and Belizean archaeology. Also, it is pinch pot making season, and we have brand new hot off the press update on that tonight. The first session will be held August 26th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in the anthropology lab at the Richland campus of Dallas College. The second session will be held September 16th at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. A couple of notes on this. In order to attend either of those, you have to be on a list prior to showing up. So please, 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 if you want to attend, get in touch with our publications editor, Molly Hall. She'll put you on a list, and then you're ready to go. You don't have to pay an entry fee to the Fort Worth Nature Center, for instance. You don't have to buy any textbooks from Richland campus of Dallas College to attend. You can just show up, but you have to be on a list. The second one is, these time frames are not mandatory. Okay, you don't have to show up at 10 a.m. and be there to noon. You can come and go as you please. However, with the amount of materials that we're receiving, and because they're going to come to us pre-prepared, it may only take an hour and a half or so to make 500 of these kits. So if you show up to Richland campus at 11:30 and nobody is there, it's because they were super duper productive. It's possible that I may show up each of those days with donuts or kolaches or something. We'll see. This is also a general reminder and a call for papers for the 2023 volume of the NTAS Journal. Please, again, contact Molly Hall for more information on that. And finally, you all have received no fewer than 27 different emails from me about this, and it's the second time I'm going to announce it at a meeting. We have several outreach opportunities coming up, including Texas Can You Dig It? If you would like to participate in that, it's in Gainesville, Texas, on September 22nd from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Please contact me at president@ntxas.org. the Doss Pioneer Heritage Festival, which will be held in Weatherford on October 7th from, I believe, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. As you might be aware, that overlaps with the TAS annual meeting. So if you're not planning to attend that meeting, but would like to go talk archaeology and hand out pinch pot making kits to thousands of excited children, please get in touch with Katrina Nuncio. And finally, Denton Dig It, which will be held in Denton, Texas on Saturday, October 28th from, let's just say 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's in that range, I believe. It certainly starts at 9 a.m. That is held concurrently with the Denton Farmers Market that appears every month. So if you'd like to go get some handmade soap and also hand out pinch pot making kits to excited young archaeologists.
We make them there. We make the pinch pots.
Oh, and we also make pinch pots there. I just received this information right in this moment. So if you want to make pinch pots there and get your handmade soap simultaneously, please get in touch with Lynn Sullivan about attending Denton Dig It. And with that, we'll pass it over to our main event, our August 2023 guest speaker, Dr. Gus Costa. Thank you.
The button over there. Push. Yeah. Hello. Wake up.
And everything.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. See if I can get this closer so it's louder. Really pleased to be here tonight, get to talk to you guys about bison and bison jumps. So tonight I'm going to be talking about some initial work that Texas Parks and Wildlife did along with Texas Tech University at Caprock Canyon State Park. Go forward.
Click the screen.
Here we go. Okay, number one headline that you need to remember about this site is that it adds critical data to the story of late Holocene bison hunting in the Southern Plains. But beyond that, the site is really interesting because bison hunting with jumps is a very dramatic event. And so almost every American knows something about Indigenous people's history and how it involved bison jumps. Beyond that, it's really important from an anthropological perspective because it's a community activity. People harvest bison in large numbers. And the logistics involved in hunting bison in large numbers is really impressive. It's quite difficult to lure bison towards a cliff and get them to jump off of it. If you're successful in doing that, you have a giant mess to deal with. So you have to process all of those animals who have really thick hide and will rot really quickly, very quickly, and turn that into something that you and your family can use. Beyond that, there's a lot of interesting social stuff that goes on at these presumably annual events. People are feasting, they're trading, people are getting married. There are lots of rituals involved. So it's very interesting from an anthropological perspective. I got this quote in here from Jack Brink, who's famous for doing work at Head Smashed In bison jump in Alberta. It creates a massive amount of biomass. And so if a typical herd of 100 bison run off a cliff at a single event, this is something that's considered average. There's nothing in human evolution that is comparable to the amount of food that is available to people at that point in time. Even the killing of a whale by Inuit people in the Arctic, the largest animal ever hunted by indigenous people, does not compare to one of these bison hunts. It is a massive amount of food. So that gives it really interesting perspective. The other, and probably the most important thing about this particular bison jump is it's super rare. There are lots of different ways to kill bison, and we have many kill sites in Texas. However, jumps are practically non-existent in the Southern Plains. You guys may be familiar with Bonfire Shelter. That's our other bison jump site in Texas, way down here. Until 2 years ago, it was the only bison jump south of the Mason-Dixon line. There's this strong false perception that jumps were standard procedure everywhere, and that is probably not the case. Just for comparison, here's a map of jumps in different types of bison kill sites in the Alberta, Montana area. Very common. Compare that to Texas. Beyond all that, it's gorgeous out there in the Caprock Canyon State Park area. That's definitely a bonus. And the other cool thing about it is there's this resident descendant community in the park. This is the last vestige of the southern herd that lives in the park. It's the Texas bison herd, okay? And I tell people, you know, digging bison remains in the park is a lot like being a paleontologist at Jurassic Park, where you're digging up the dinosaur bones and you can go over and actually watch the dinosaurs walk around. The reason that it actually is a really good analogy is the southern herd, it's different from most bison. Bison are northern animals. They're adapted to cold weather. The bison that live in the Southern Plains, they're kind of different. They're smaller. They give birth at a slightly different time than northern bison. So trying to understand how the southern herd is different right now and possibly into the past is something that we hope to try to do with different types of research, both with the ancient animal remains and the animals that we currently have. All of this stuff together makes for a really sexy archaeology project. And so when I had a chance to get involved, I really jumped at it. Okay, the story here starts with Rick and Susan Day, who in November of 2021 were scouting around the western edge of Caprock Canyon State Park to plan for a geology field trip that they were going to take some students on at Lockney ISD. They're both teachers. And Rick is a THC steward, and he's a really incredible guy who I think he's watching now, but he's always scampering around in these areas that would be inaccessible to me, looking for archaeology. And when he finds it, he's notifying Tony Lyle and other people to go back and investigate. So on this day, he approached the western edge of the park here, and he found a corner-notch dart point lying on the surface. Interesting, right? Not unusual, but they approached the cliff face further, and on this little apron of dirt underneath the cliff face, they found bison bones eroding out of that cut face. And with that, Rick and Susan discovered the second bison jump known in Texas. And this is the first one that's been found in 63 years since Bonfire was recognized. So I think they deserve a lot of credit for what we've been able to do here. The other really curious thing about this site is the cliff itself, it's on the boundary of the park. So the bison actually were collected, driven to the edge of this cliff, and landed inside the park. And so we were really lucky that that happened, because Texas Parks and Wildlife is responsible for the stewardship of these remains. And that allowed us to actually go in and do some investigations, which are continuing. So following the initial discovery, Rick Day got in touch with Tony Lyle, who's the regional archaeologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife. And he also got in touch with Dr. Chris Lintz, who went out there to confirm what Rick had found. And they scouted around and found a lot more archaeology around that area there. And so this was followed by several sort of successive field trips. And Chris was able to put together a short report. And his outline essentially was, okay, here's the site. And it's kind of shaped like a Greek theater. I call it an amphitheater. Immediately below the cliff here on the left, you have what is presumably a kill site. These little white things mark the places where we were seeing bones. Blue triangles here are artifacts. Separate from that, they found bison bones and artifacts over here. And so this was given a different site number and was presumed to be a processing site. Here's all the points that were found, mostly lying around on the surface. So we have stemmed dart points, we have corner notch dart points, we have a couple of arrow points. One is a scalhorn. A Washita point was later found up here. So a combination of late archaic, transitional archaic, and late prehistoric types of projectile weaponry. Here's a view of the site itself, where you're kind of looking to the west. The cliff face is up here. Bones are found directly beneath the cliff face here. There's a little ridge that connects this area of the site with this other area, which we've called the processing site. You can see from this photo that it's a heavily eroded landscape. And if we go and look at the actual area of the site that is present and compare it to the area of the site that we think was once there, we see that almost 70% of that area has been lost to erosion. So this environment is peculiar because erosion is one of the dominant processes that we have to deal with. And erosion is caused by several different factors. One is subsidence, related to these little bubbles of salt that form in Permian beds, push up on the overlying rocks. And when they intersect water, they actually dissolve into these little brines and collapse. And they form little micro basins that fill in with other dirt from elsewhere. That accelerates erosion in this landscape. There are other processes like spring sapping, landslides, rainwash erosion, all of which are causing this environment to be wasted away. An anthropologist in Oklahoma produced a paper, I think in the mid-90s, and he asked the question, where's the cliff? He's talking about bison hunting in the Southern Plains in general. He argued that the Southern Plains, the reason that you don't find bison jumps in the Southern Plains is you don't have the right landforms. There aren't any cliffs, right? In some cases, in some landscapes, maybe that's the case. But if you look at the Caprock escarpment, that's a big cliff, okay? It's not that there isn't a cliff, it's that the cliff is moving and the deposits that are underneath the cliff are also moving. So the probability of finding a jump, if a jump occurred in this particular landscape, is very low. So erosion, that's the antagonist in this story. Folks from the Bureau of Economic Geology here in Texas have been studying erosion in this landscape for quite a long time, and they've calculated some annual erosion rates in different landforms in that region, and they range from less than a centimeter to over 70 centimeters. That doesn't sound like a ton per year, but when you think about deep time, that turns into a lot of erosion. In 1,000 years, that's something like 8 football fields of erosion, okay? Your site, if it's within that range, is gonna be gone. Most people don't like evil clowns, and so you guys understand how serious this issue is, I've made this clown the antagonist erosion. So here's a case study in itself, all right? Our site is right here on the western edge of the park. Just within this immediate vicinity, the Bureau of Economic Geology did a study and found 4 different collapsed salt domes in the immediate vicinity of the archaeological site. These are low spots on the landscape that are filling with sediment that's sourced from the immediate vicinity over here. That's accelerating erosion. So it was very apparent from the beginning of this work that erosion was an issue. The next step there was to salvage the site before it got any worse. And that's where Texas Parks and Wildlife was able to come to an agreement with Texas Tech University, who came in to save the day, essentially. Dr. Brett Houk and Dr. Tamra Walters agreed to do a fall field school out at the site to just test essentially what was there. In May of 2022, we scheduled a preliminary trip, and that's where Rick, Chris Lintz, Tony Lyle, Charles Frederick, myself, and several other geoarchaeologists and Dr. Houk went out to visit the site, get a sense of the surroundings, and sample bones for radiocarbon dating. So here's us scampering around. As you can see, there's the cliff face here, and directly beneath the cliff face, you have this little carpet of dirt, little strip. Underneath that, this is all eroded bedrock. So it's about a meter, a little bit more than a meter thick right here, thins down, gets thicker again. This is the Holocene deposit that has archaeology and bison bones. One of the things that we wanted to accomplish during that trip as well was to get a sense of what's up above the site. Are there any features up there that are related to people actually driving bison towards the cliff face? And one of the first steps to assessing this was having Mark Willis come out with his drone, fly the area immediately above the site and map it using LiDAR. So we were able to produce a 30 centimeter resolution LiDAR of the immediate vicinity to see, hey, are there any linear features that jump out at us? You can see in this map here, not really. So we went to ground truth it, and we got permission from the property owner to go up there and look around. And here's one of the reasons why we wanted to go up there and look around. This is Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump in Alberta, Canada. And Head Smashed In is a World Heritage Site. It's been used for about 6,000 years. There's something like 100,000 bison that were probably killed there. And this is the sort of stereotypical setup for a bison jump. You have a low-lying area that's got water, a river corridor, which is the gathering basin. People push bison up towards the kill site. And then closer to the kill site, you have these drive lanes. And those drive lanes are marked by tiny little currents at Head Smashed In, which they believe people were sticking things like sticks, brush, things that would move and potentially scare the bison to staying in those drive lanes. Here's a reconstruction of what people think it might have looked like, kind of like a row of short bushes or hedges. And from the perspective of the bison, it could have had an optical illusion where it looked like it was an impenetrable fence line. And interestingly enough, bison have this weird quirk where if they can't see through something, if it's opaque, they won't even attempt to go through it. They'll just assume that it's solid rock. And indigenous people figured this out at some point in the past, and they were able to manipulate that into keeping bison in pens that were just covered with hides, or holding up a bunch of hides so that it appears like you have a solid wall, and you can actually funnel the bison. But if there's just a little bit of a gap in whatever material you're using, they will run right through that thing. So a lot of the bison kills in the northern plains are just these little pens made out of sticks covered with hide that people drove the bison into. The bison would just circle around, not even try to break out. The reason I wanted to show this photo here is you can see how tiny these little rock cairn features are. So we went up there and looked around, stood at the cliff edge and looked down and said, yeah, that would probably kill you if it fell. We didn't see anything up there that day when we looked around, but those little cairn features that we've seen elsewhere in the northern plains, they're so small that we might have missed something like that. Here it is looking down on the site. Here's the wadge of Holocene sediment that has bison bone in it. There's a little ridge that extends out towards the processing site. I did a least cost path analysis using the elevation model that Mark Willis made. And basically what this means is in GIS, you calculate the slope and then you give it a starting point and an ending point. So presumably this was the collection basin, right? And this is the finish line. And the computer tells you, okay, this is the easiest way to get from point A to point B. So this might be a point for us to look at more closely because this is the route that one would predict bison would get up there using modern day topography, right? So erosion has probably changed some of this landform over the past 1,000 years or so. So if you have bison in the collection basin, folks could have positioned themselves behind the bison. We know from oral traditions and from ethnohistorical interviews with people that indigenous people often would disguise themselves as wolves, which commonly, hang out around bison. And they could have positioned themselves behind the bison while somebody up here was essentially luring the bison towards the cliff by pretending to be a calf that was separated from its mother. They would actually do calf calls and sort of draw those mothers in to the drive lane itself. The other curious thing is George Frisson, who's famous for working on bison hunting sites in the northern plains. He claimed that bison are so curious that if you get near a bison, within their vision, stand still, move a little bit. Stand still, move a little bit. Bison are so curious that they will actually come towards you. And that's one way of sort of drawing the animals in. And Native people knew bison behavior so well that they were able to trick them into a position, say about midway. It's not a sprint from here all the way to here. It's coaxing them up into this area, and then at the very last minute, stampeding them all towards the cliff edge, because it only works if you have a large mass of bison headed towards the cliff edge. There's more to it than that, and we'll get to that. We had Lee Bennett come out and give us a demonstration on his technique of using insulating foam to actually jacket the bones and remove them. And this was a technique that he's used quite a bit in Oklahoma. Lee is one of the most experienced living people working on Southern Plains bison in prehistory. So it was good to have him as a consultant.
Making sure that the foam is down, the crevices, touching the bone.
So this technique, the foam will harden. You can label it, say this way is up, this way is north. This is what it is. It's rigid, it's light. It's better than plaster of Paris because there are fewer parts that you have to mix together. It's not as heavy. And so this was really useful for us to protect the bones as they were coming out and get them back to the lab where we could laboriously remove the foam. But acetone basically takes the foam right off. You just peel it off. Right after this, we got some of our radiocarbon dates back, and the age of the bison remains is primarily late archaic, about 16,000 calibrated years BP. And there is one individual that is late prehistoric in age. These are the only dates that we currently have, and all of the dates come from the area immediately below the cliff. So we don't have any dates on animal remains from the processing site. So Texas Tech University did a field school in the fall of last year. Lots of grad students were involved. Lots of people were involved in this project. Lots of volunteers as well. These are the areas that they focused their test excavations on. Quite a few single units over here in the processing site. Basically, we went after low-hanging fruit. These were places where obviously there were lots of bison bones eroding out of the edge that were going to erode away if we didn't capture them right away. And also we tended to select places where we knew the students weren't going to fall off a cliff and hurt themselves. So there's still a lot there that needs to be excavated that's a little more perilous. This is block A. So basically the field school got broken up into 9 3-day sessions with about a dozen students and volunteers each session. And they faced some pretty nasty conditions. You know, heavy winds, their tents were getting blown all over the place. We had a blizzard. There were bison bulls preventing them from getting out to the site on certain days. We got as many geoarchaeologists as just about there are in Texas out there. I volunteered primarily to deal with the bones, so it was good to have all these other folks out there who were helping collect dirt samples. Here's a view of block A as we were excavating. This is Tony Lyle, the regional archaeologist for the park. On the right, you're looking at part of a sternum in front of a rib cage, there's scapula, lots of thoracic vertebra, and other vertebrae jumbled together. This is towards the end of the excavation of block A, by the way. But you can see it's all kind of jumbled together. This is a relatively large bison skull that we pulled out of block A. This is Dr. Brett Houk on the left, covering that skull in a Cheeto-like foam. And the very last weekend we went out there, we finally found stone tools in situ. Up until that point, we had only found lithics on the surface. We hadn't found them in our dig. And so we found a simple flake and another flake that's on its way to becoming a biface, both relatively close together at the bottom of the bone bed. Not diagnostic, unfortunately. Here's a plan map of what block A looked like in terms of the animal remains. It's difficult to see here, but these are forelimbs that are in articulated position. You have various components of rib cages that are intact, vertebrae that are intact, toe bones that are intact. So these animals are in various states of decay and disarticulation here. And this is a pattern that we saw everywhere we dug. The animals weren't fully disarticulated. In some cases, they were still pretty well put together. This is a plot of the orientation of all those long bones to try to assess, you know, what post-depositional factors might have been sort of influencing their orientation and their dip. So you can see most of these guys are pointing downslope and are more or less level. This is the depth of all the bone remains that we had in block A. Here are the two flakes. You can see there's a big drop from this topmost point here down to the next lowest. And essentially this follows the contours of the pre-existing bedrock. You look here, you have this little shelf, which is made by an erosionally resistant layer, and then this little bowl. So the bison remains were sort of getting shed off of this little nick point, like a waterfall, right? Aside from block A over here, we did some other work in this region. We put a little salvage unit in one side of this gully that bisects the Holocene pediment here. And this is what we found. So This is hard. It's hard to make out what this is, but it's actually the underside of a skull that's pretty banged up. And commingled with all of that, which is mapped here as red things, are tabular siltstones. And some of them are actually on top of bones. This one here actually overlaps this humerus. Again, looking at the orientation and dip of those bones, they're pointed down and away. Here's another photograph. You see we've already foamed up the skull that was here. This is the thing that's probably the most interesting bone right now from the site, is this humerus. This humerus was underneath this tabular piece of stone, so it was covering, say, about that much. You can see it's broken in multiple places. And when we take it apart, back at the lab, we can see that we have compound fractures on this bone. And these show trauma at the time of death that are consistent with a fall, a sudden deceleration. And in particular, there's compressive force involved. There's, okay, so here are all the fractures mapped by these red lines. And how we know that this is diagnostic of a compressive force, it made a blade out of bone. Okay, and this fracture does not go into the inside of the diaphysis, of the shaft of the long bone. Okay, when we break bones, and when humans break animal bones, the break goes from the inside to the outside. And so you get really diagnostic negative flake scars on the inner tube of the bone. This type of thing can only be done by somebody actually grabbing a bone and flaking it like a core, or by the bone actually breaking through compressive fractures. Beyond that, we had a metapodial from the same unit that had this expanding hairline fracture in multiple places that is suggestive of compressive force. We know that this injury occurred while the periosteum, the tissue that covers the bone, sheathes the bone, and the joint capsule were intact, okay? If this had happened after the animal died, somebody was trying to get at the marrow, there would have been pieces of bone all over the place. The bone would not have been assembled still. Beyond that, we have not found any bones that have actually been hammer percussed, like people trying to get into the bone to get the bone marrow out. They don't exist yet in the assemblage. So include a little video here to demonstrate what compressive force does to a long bone. See how these little flakes are shearing longitudinally along the same axis as that force. You hardly ever see that in archaeological assemblages. It's unusual. So the distance from the top of the cliff to the pediment below is about 20 meters. That's pretty big for most bison jumps. If you look at other bison jumps, most of them are well below that. So at Nighthawk, you can kind of compare it to a 6-story building. And whereas, you know, Nighthawk and Bonfire are at six stories or above, the rest of these jumps are much lower. If we look at statistics for humans in terms of fatalities from falls, ones that are above 6 stories are almost 90% fatal in humans. If they're below four stories, half of them are fatal. And actually, Bonfire, if you take away the little slide that the bison would have gone down before they actually free fall, it's less than that. So Nighthawk is unusually high for a jump. It's not the highest jump that there is. There actually are other jumps that are similarly high. The only reason that I wanted to drive this home is because this has implications for what people had to do afterwards. Okay, if the bison were just flat out dead, you would expect to have fewer points on the site. one other thing I wanted to say about that. Oh yeah. Paramortem trauma in bison from jumps, okay? Actual damage related to the bison falling off cliffs, hardly ever documented. I have no examples of it in the literature anywhere at known jumps. I'd be interested to find out more about that. So this one example that we have at this site is the only one that I know of right now, even at well-established bison jumps. Maybe people just aren't looking. A lot of these bison jumps got excavated, you know, early times, 80s, 70s. Okay, moving over to the processing site. So we focus most of our excavations over here, salvage unit 2 and 1. And these other test units, they basically didn't get us anything. We had bison remains in this erosional cut right here that were poking out at us. So we took a geoarchaeological column here, and because you could actually see bison remains at 2 separate levels in this location. This is something that we weren't able to establish elsewhere. So this is interesting relative to our story about site formation. And we haven't yet processed those samples, so we're interested to see what they're going to look like. But essentially, this deposit, we believe, was laid down by sheet wash and colluvium coming from a high point that's over here on the right that's no longer there. And actually, if you look at the bedrock, you can trace this all the way around to the other side of the site directly below the cliff. So it's more or less in the same position relative to the underlying bedrock, this little wedge of Holocene alluvium, or colluvium rather. Okay, this is salvage unit 1 at the processing site. And the story here is we have relatively complete carcasses that are relatively under-processed. And most of the remains here, which are color-coded, the white, the gray, these all could be from the same animal. We can't tell just yet. There are a couple of other individuals mixed in here. This is an adult female skull. And beyond that, there are actually 2 separate layers that are represented in this unit as well. The ones that are coded red come from the upper bone level. Everything else is from the lower bone level. And you can actually see that in terms of how they're preserved. This one mandible from salvage unit 1 had 1 cut mark. This is the only evidence of processing at the site at all. So one of the main questions that we were faced when dealing with this processing site was, how did these mostly complete bison skeletons get 170 meters from the present cliff face? Bulls are more than 1,500 pounds. Remember, Southern Plains bison weigh a little bit less than Northern Plains bison, so they would be easier to drag, but not by much. The analysis of the animal remains themselves suggests that they were not moved there. They weren't cut into packages and then shipped off to the processing site. Okay, if they were brought there, they had to have been drugged there relatively complete. So we can look at a couple of clues in the landforms that are present today to come up with ideas about how those bison got there. One is, take a look at this ridge. We know that this deposit down here had to have come from material that was located at a higher point relative to this deposit. For this stuff to get buried, there had to have been something higher right there. This ridge connects these 2 areas. And actually on the opposite side, there's a little remnant of a pediment on this side. So it would have been a symmetrical landform. See that little pediment that's jumping out there? We were looking in this deposit here to see if we could find anything. We haven't yet. So the current hypothesis that I have is this was sort of a combination of a jump and a reverse arroyo style kill where individuals would have chased the bison to the cliff face. A number of them fell off that narrow spot. And then there was a ridge that actually connected the uplands to the lowland areas here. And as bison were coming down, people essentially ambushed them at the bottom. Those bison remains over here became buried, and erosion has cut away the area in between since then. That's a very elaborate scenario, but that's the evidence that we have right now. That's the best explanation for what we've looked at this point. So I took about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months or so, took all the bone from Texas Tech University, loaded it into the back of my truck all the way, drove it back to Houston, and spent a lot of time obsessively cleaning these bison remains and doing an initial analysis. So what bones were there? This is just block A. Okay, this diagram gives you a general idea of what animal remains were present and in what abundance. Okay, so skulls are relatively common, mandibles, forelimbs especially common, less so hind limbs. We have relatively few femurs in the assemblage, thigh bones, lots of vertebrae. So hind limbs are underrepresented, relatively full carcasses are present and untouched. And again, no percussion or breaking of long bones was seen anywhere in the assemblage so far. It's a small sample. The minimum number of individuals that we have is about 11 between the three different units that we put in that yielded bison remains. And that's probably an underestimate, remember. Most bison kills, you're talking 30 plus individuals to be able to actually have a successful bison kill. You couldn't drive just 12 bison over the cliff. You'd have to have more. What is the season of the kill? Okay, young animals in the assemblage that are less than 5 years old, their teeth develop at a particular rate that allows us to estimate what season the kill took place. We only had one informative mandible in the entire assemblage, and that is from a 1.5-year-old, essentially. So this is an individual that was born in the late spring, early summer, lived an entire year into the following fall, based on how their teeth erupted. This is a nifty little graph that Jack Brink put together, talks about how people, bison hunting, a lot of people think of bison hunting as having to do with bioenergetics. Females are, throughout the course of the year, the amount of fat that is on a bison is highly variable. They want to get fat so that they can actually give birth. And a long time ago, indigenous peoples realized that if you take a bison in the fall season, you're going to get a fatter bison. People wanted fat bison all the way up through the historic period. The white folks who were out hunting on the prairies, along with the indigenous people, they also wanted fat bison. So people generally avoided going after the males because the males were only fat in a certain particular time of the year. Let's see, fat bulls. Bulls are fat right before the breeding season in the early summer. Cows are fat right after the breeding season. So calving takes place within 2 weeks in the late spring. This is the calving season for most bison in the north. Here's our calving season in Texas, a few weeks earlier. So when you adjust that to the age of this individual that we found, the kill event probably took place in September, October, and this is the time when cows are fat. The sample is 1, okay? The sample is 1. This is our best guess right now. We want to get more remains so we can feel better about understanding when that kill took place. But a lot of kills are in the fall because, again, that's when bison are fat. I haven't yet completed a full taxonomic analysis of the animal remains, but I wanted to include this photograph just to show you these two bones are the same but type of bone. They came from the same excavation unit. This one came from the uppermost bone layer. This one came from the bottom. So there's something interesting going on here in terms of the history of these bones and how quickly they were buried or exhumed and reburied. And that's a story that I want to try to get into more with additional analysis. The other thing here is there are curious things that I noticed when cleaning the animal remains, like gravel in the nostril cavity. These are indications that some of the bones have been moved around since these animals died. And this is a photograph of a stairwell area that's next to the lodge where we stay at Caprock Canyon State Park. And I looked at that one day and kind of had an eureka moment. This is kind of a metaphor for the site formation model that I have, which is you have these various steps of erosion resistant bedrock that underlie the site, and Holocene sediments are just draping across it. And within those are bison.
You go back to the skull.
All right. Here's area E. We haven't talked about this area. This is the largest extent of the deposit that you can see in cross section because it is getting eroded away. It's directly below the cliff face. And this is the area that we avoided because we didn't want students to fall. But we hope to go back there. And again, this sort of explains the model that I have. You have these, the underlying Permian bedrock, and there are some layers within it that are resistant to erosion relative to others. So you get this kind of stepped topography, and the Holocene sediments are draped across that. You can see this is a plot of where the bones are, and the bone bed goes from being one bone thick down beneath this little step here, and it thickens out from, 5 centimeters thick to over 50 centimeters thick all of a sudden. And you can kind of see that right here. It's about one bone thick right underneath this green nail, and it thickens out. And we've taken 3 column samples for geoarchaeological analysis in a series down this slope that we haven't yet been able to process.
So, is it water that's discolored that, or what?
Water that's what?
This discolored that?
These here?
No, on the rock.
What's discolored?
Well, looks like a little channel. One is dark out.
Yeah, this was cut recently, so it's not as dry as the stuff around it. All right, so last little vignette. I was working with Charles Frederick on a site in Williamson County, and we were going down to the creek bed to poke around one day, and I noticed there were tons of dead cows on a slope. And I was, of course, just coming out of my days of working on bison bones for 2 months. And I thought, wow, the universe is coming together for me here, because this is exactly what I needed to demonstrate how large ungulate bones move across a landscape where you have high relief. And so I very quickly tried to document these things because they were on private property, so I should not have been running around there. But so on this little slope here, about 20-degree slope, we actually found distinct bone assemblages on these adjacent landforms. So the uplands, you had relatively articulated animal remains scattered about. So there's a pelvis and a couple of femur. On the shoulder itself, there was just a giant pile of carcasses, many of which, there's a leg bone still articulated. You can see there's skin and hoof still stuck on it. And this, I think, is a really good analog for how, say, a lot of the toe bones we were finding that were still articulated together were getting buried right about this stage of decomposition. There probably was still skin covering those bones. There was a heck of a chaotic scatter down on the slope, and then way down on the toe slope, you might see a few bones here and there. It's difficult to do pathonomic analyses on these mass kills because there just aren't a lot of those on the landscape. So it's a really sort of unique scenario taphonomically. And only one person has ever tried throwing a bison, say, over a cliff. And they did this at Head Smashed In. They got a couple of bison carcasses, put them in a dump truck, and threw the loader off the cliff. And they only did it for video. They didn't actually do anything with the animal remains, actually analyze the bones and how they broke. Unfortunate missed opportunity, but I just wanted to show here that it's important to think about how these animal remains were getting scattered after you have a large pile of carcasses. So the general model that I have right now for how the site formed is that these bones are accumulating below these little steps, these scarps in small basins. And a lot of those little basins are now truncated by erosion. So I think of these old-timey baseball games where you're trying to get the little pinball into the cup, and then say you do get pinball into the cup and the cup is sliced in two. So I think that's what we're seeing out there. However, I actually don't know how laterally extensive these bone deposits are. So we simply don't have enough holes in the ground yet. So moving on to context, what do we already know about late archaic mass bison kills? There actually is a late archaic regional kill pattern. They're defined primarily by arroyo traps, sites that have corner notched dart points, very simple butchery tools, flakes, bifacial knives, chopper cores. These are all the things that we found at the Nighthawk jump site. Generally speaking, we have a small to moderate number of bison. None of these sites really have been studied in detail in terms of the actual animal remains, and the number, or actually the volumes of excavations from these bison kill sites is relatively low. So, you know, we think that the herd size is probably relatively small. One thing that is interesting is most of these late archaic kill sites have a very low use intensity of the kill. There isn't a lot of butchery damage. There aren't a lot of remains that have been carried away off-site that we can tell. Seasonality, probably fall, but that's what most people say anyways. Cow and juvenile groups. That's what we actually have at the Nighthawk bison jump. We don't have any evidence of males being there right now. So more or less, this actually does fit the pattern of late archaic mass bison kills that we know of in the Panhandle, except that it's a jump. The other curious thing about the immediate vicinity is almost 80% of all late archaic mass bison kills in the Southern Plains are at the headwaters of the Red River. So this area around Caprock Canyon State Park is actually really interesting in terms of understanding bison hunting in the Southern Plains in general. So, important key takeaways. The Nighthawk site is rare and it is endangered. Erosion is a huge problem. The site is just melting away. The volunteers who have been helping out on this have really helped to save the day, and broader bison research opportunities in the park and beyond the park are enormous. We're trying to tell a story at the park about human bison relationships through time, and the fact that we have a living descendant community there gives us lots of really interesting opportunities. One of the things that we want to do moving forward is to get animal DNA from the bison bones and actually compare them to the population that's living in the park. Parks and Wildlife has exquisite genomic data on the population that is in the park. So if we can just extract DNA, we may be able to come up with some interesting research. Once again, erosion. Here's a photo that I took, 2022. This is a photo that Rick Day took a year later. You can see same tree, more roots are exposed. Definitely there's something happening here, okay? Erosion happens slow, 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 and then all of a sudden you're missing a chunk of your site. We've installed little nails in various places on this erosional face, on top of this erosional face, to try to quantify how much erosion is happening. So Rick Day goes back to the site periodically to check it out and take measurements on all these nails. So far, we have not been able to actually get any measurements that indicate that erosion is happening at the spots where the nails are, except that every time Rick goes back and looks around, erosion has happened here, erosion has happened there. It's happening everywhere except for where we have the dang nails. Okay. And just a week ago, he was out there and he found that part of the cliff had collapsed on the northern side of the site and had dumped a bunch of rock scree actually onto the pediment slope. So, you know, we need to deal with getting this site saved before it's entirely gone, because it's extremely rare and important to everybody. So next steps, we're trying to secure funding for more work. I'm collaborating with Plains Archaeological Research, they're a nonprofit, to go for different grants. We're going after the Summer League grant, which I'm submitting like next week. We need to finish our geoarchaeological analysis, but mostly we want to go back and salvage that high bed in Area E, because it's high, it's eroding away. It's probably one of the areas where we're going to get the most data about the actual kill site itself. And of course, we want a larger, more representative sample of the bison that were there. And as I already mentioned, we want to try to get DNA out of those bones. And we need money and volunteers. So thanks very much. And
thank you, Gus. Let's open the floor for questions. Yeah.
When you were doing the foam on the bones, you covered the bones with anything or you foam them?
So Lee Bennett didn't recommend that we do any of that, but in retrospect, I probably would put, say, foil or saran wrap, because I have done that at the conservation stage where I've like removed foam from a skull and it was just not stable, and I cleaned it and then had to actually put more foam back on it, and I used a layer then. So I haven't experimented with that yet, but
You said you use acetone to get the foam?
yeah, acetone actually takes
The question for the Zoom folks.
Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Does the foam go right on the bones, or is there like a protective layer?
The question from the audience is, does the foam go straight on the bones, or is there a protective layer between foam and bones?
right. So dealer's choice. You know, whatever works.
Acetone doesn't mess with the bone?
No,
Does
I mean,
it just melt the foam?
yeah, when you put the acetone off, the foam comes right off.
Comes off or just dissolves, melts?
Both.
Oh.
Sometimes you can peel off a whole chunk of it, and other times maybe little amounts will stick to the bone, and you'll have to just go in and kind of rub them off.
Okay.
So the main point is you're getting the bone out without breaking it up into a million
Right.
pieces. That is a problem in Texas archaeology. Okay, when y'all excavate, I mean, habitually, the bone goes into tiny little pieces, it ends up in an aluminum foil packet. You can't do much with that after that, you know, oftentimes. So I think this is a really good technique that CRM companies and other individuals should consider using in the future for whatever, not just bison.
A couple of questions. How many people, individuals would be involved in this operation? And two, how much of the resulting bison would be utilized? What were the methods of utilization or preserving the meat? Or
Right.
Okay, so the question is, how many people would be involved in the process of actually killing the bison, and then how much bison would be processed as a result of an individual kill?
Great. So very good question. Minimum 30. We're talking at the driveway. Okay. So you're probably going to have, and this is just based on people talking to Blackfoot Indians, ethnohistorical records. The other curious thing about bison jump hunting only one European has ever witnessed a bison jump, ever. And that wasn't a legit bison jump because these Native Americans had horses and they were chasing bison towards a cliff with bows and arrows. Okay, that isn't the style of hunting that we actually see in the archaeological record. People were on foot. And so we actually don't know quite a bit about how these worked, but presumably there would have been 3 or more people who would have been encouraging the bison from behind to move up towards the drive lanes, an individual potentially drawing the bison by acting like a lost calf, and then a number of people along the drive lanes, several families probably hiding behind cairns or low spots on the landscape to take up position to keep those bison in the drive lanes. And so 30 is minimum. We're probably talking 50 to 100 people. And not just those people involved in getting the bison towards the finish line where the cliff is, there's a whole other slew of people down below ready to club those bison, to finish them off if they're not dead, and then other people in the village ready to process, okay? Because bison have really thick hides, they spoil fast. And so you got to cut open those bison, get their guts out, get the skin off very quickly to cool down that tissue if you want to eat it without spoiling. And in terms of processing, I mean, you need an army to process most bison jumps. And so, yes, a lot of material probably was spoiled. A lot of animals probably weren't utilized. Jack Brink says that the Blackfoot, at least, have an oral tradition that suggests that all the bison had to be killed. Okay, all of them. You couldn't let anybody get away, because if you let one bison get away, he would go and tell the others about this trick you played on him. So no survivors, even if you don't use all of those materials. So you can imagine, like, if people aren't utilizing all of that biomass that you've created, I don't think they really can, but you have this, it's like a war field, right? Just a mass of bison carcasses, its whole it's its own microenvironment, right? And we have several instances in the archaeological record of bison kills and jumps in particular of people actually burning those bison beds. And that's, of course, how Bonfire got its name, right? Bonfire Shelter. It's because bone bed 3 of Bonfire Shelter is burned. Some people think that was spontaneous combustion. However, there are at least 2 other sites that I know of in Alberta that have the same thing. Okay, so presumably Native peoples were actually burning the remains at these bone beds to get rid of the stink, but also so that they could use that jump again, so other animals wouldn't be either trying to scavenge the carcasses or the scent of the actual kill wouldn't put off the bison. It's a really long explanation, sorry.
Any other questions in the room? Anything on Zoom?
We've got a number on Zoom, so we're going to start our lightning round of answers here. Sorry, we've got a number of questions. Can the taphonomic differences seen in shallow and deep layers be from different events at varying time?
Absolutely, and yes, absolutely, and we don't have radiocarbon dates on those 2 components of the site. So that's one of the things that I would like to do, is to be able to tell. Right now, I'm operating under the assumption that both of them are late archaic. And the upper bed, I actually believe, is redeposited stuff from further upstream. So I think it's one event, you're getting 2 layers downslope, but I don't know that for sure.
Next question, Bill Purdue. As bison are migratory, what was the landscape like during this period, such as plants and water? Second part of this question, was it greener, wetter at that time? And did that affect the time frame for the indigenous population to plan their seasonal kills?
Yes. I mean, so that's a great question. So there's a paleoenvironmental record for the late Holocene available at the Lake Theo area, and then there's another alluvial section that's been looked at on the North Palm River within the park. However, that hasn't been a focus of our work yet. It would be wonderful to expand the scope of our work to try to get a paleoenvironmental record within the park that is relevant to understanding when deposits are forming and when deposits are being eroded away through this period of time. We know that bison presumably were scarce in the Southern Plains area, in fact, over most of the plains during the Middle Archaic and through various periods of time. But yeah, we haven't gotten into that level of detail with our work yet.
There's more.
Go ahead.
From Mickey Miller, given that you have a scholar but not a date for that period, do you think that there were later devastation jumps?
Right, so maybe. We have a washpout point that was in the gully that separated the two main lobes of the Holocene deposit beneath the cliff. And one mandible from an individual, a young individual that we dated to about 570 BP. So we have a late prehistoric arrow point and a late prehistoric period bison remain in the middle of our kill site. Other than that, I'm not sure what other sort of late prehistoric animal remains we actually have at the site. It may be that those deposits have been deflated away. We don't know yet. So maybe, probably.
All right, one more here from Tim Sullivan. I'm going to combine two questions he's got. Since these kill events were combined with social gathering and interaction, is there any evidence for feasting, sharing, etc. on any such sites? Second part of this question. Here's an afterthought. Any chance the burned remains are evidence of smoking meat for later use?
Right, okay, so feasting, almost certainly, but we're not digging in the right place to find that right now. There's an area that's off to the east, beyond where the supposed processing site was, that I think is the actual processing site. And we haven't dug into that at all yet because it's on a relatively flat surface. It's not going anywhere, okay? So, you know, after I'm dead, somebody can go there and dig around and tell me how I was wrong. I'd like to put a couple of test units over there. There's a heck of a lot of burned rock and lithics in that vicinity. So that very likely is where the focal point of human activity was. For the smoking of meat, yeah, they were probably doing that. And that's mostly what they were doing in the northern plains was they were killing bison in the fall, making a heck of a lot of preserved meat, pemmican, packing it away, going down into the river valley and sticking it out through the winter. So that's probably one of the reasons we see more bison kills, bison jumps in particular in the northern plains. People are living in a highly seasonal environment. They've got to pack up for winter. So, hey, kill a bunch of bison in the fall, use that meat, preserve it as best as you can, and then go hunker down. Not really a prerogative per se in Texas, but I don't know, Panhandle isn't that hospitable in the wintertime. But it, you know, so it's like the question really is like it's different in the Southern Plains, but how different is it? You know, to what extent were people having to provision for the winter, and how did that involve bison?
All right, Zoom is winning the competition for questions, so we'll bring it back to the room. Yeah.
Is there any evidence been found of a bison killed in Paladero Canyon?
The question is, has there been any evidence found of a bison kill in Paladero Canyon?
I'm not aware. Charles, you know? No, I'm not aware. There's a couple on the Canadian River. The trouble with these dang bison kills is like a lot of them are on private property. A lot of them are reported and then they disappeared. Either through erosion or some other process, you know, people digging them up. So we have a collection. We can create a list of bison hunting sites for the Southern Plains. But if you look at all of them in any significant detail, I'm talking even Bonfire, Bone Bed 3, which hasn't really been looked at closely for a while. People have been looking closely at Bone Bed 2, not Bone Bed 3. Nobody disputes that Bone Bed 3 is a legit jump. 2, people have questions. So there's a lot that we just don't know about these kill sites. And bison are everywhere. We have tons and tons of sites that are camping processing sites. Charles and Mike Quigg did a lot of work in the Panhandle area. Chris Lintz did a lot of work on these different types of bison processing sites that indicate people were killing a lot of bison, but we don't have the actual spots where that was happening.
All right, folks. Let's thank Gus Costa once more for joining us. Next on the volume, question is going to see the message, more bison content in future talks. Thank you all very much. At 8:15 on August 10th, I'll bring this meeting of the North Texas Archaeological Society to us. Thank you.
All right, good night, everybody on Zoom.
Thank you.
Saying great job on the Zoom. Excellent presentation. Great job, guys.
Good job.